Good morning, YouTube, and thank you for heeding the Twilight's call. Welcome to my brand new channel where we're going to have some fun playing Magic the Gathering both in digital and in paper. Today's a little bit of an introduction of sorts from me to you, and hopefully I make a good impression and you'll stick around for a while we discuss and play my favorite game, Magic the Gathering. Short history about myself. About 25 years ago, I began playing the game just as Tempest was released. Fell in love with the art and the game itself. I was at a summer camp and somebody's like, here, let's play this, and I was amazed by the art in the cards. And the first card that I fell in love with was Dothy Mind Ripper, one of the old shadow creatures that you could, if you hit somebody with it, you could sacrifice and make them discard 3 cards. And that was actually the first strategy I fell in love with, was discard, which is probably why I like Turgid, God of Fright out of the newer stuff. Yes, I'm kind of degenerate that way. The next card that I tried to actually build anything around was Megrim, which was first printed in Stronghold just after Tempest came out back in 1997. And the decks I tried to build were absolutely freaking terrible. Discard as a strategy, most people will realize, is not extraordinarily viable if you have no way of either keeping the cards out of their hand and then getting something for it, or it's a bad strategy. So, you know, I've tried different things throughout time, and since then, I've played through the various formats that Magic has offered, starting with Type 2, what Standard became, Extended, what Modern became, and Type 1, what Vintage became. And like all players, I have dropped in and out of the game over the years during that 25-year time span. Jumped from a couple different LGSs. The first one I played for went out of business. It was bought out and it was just run into the ground by the new owners, so I had to move on, and I took a little bit of a break during that time. So I played from Tempest through Mercadian Masks, and then I dropped out for a little while. Played it when Apocalypse came out a couple years later, and then I played until the original Ravnica block, which is when the LGS went out of business. Came back in Time Spiral when I found another LGS I could play at. And then I took another time span off right around Lorwyn because the second shop I found flooded and they were shut down for several months, and I kind of lost interest at that point. And then going into 2015, right around time Battle for Zendikar was getting ready to kick off, I found the current LGS that I play at, and one I've been at the longest. Shout out to Cataclysm Games in Machesney Park, Illinois. They started doing Commander Pods as their Friday Night Magic, and that's what I've been doing ever since. And what really got me back into it was I discovered the monocolored Planeswalker Commander precons back in 2015, and I bought the Obnixilis mono black precon to start with, and I liked him. I liked Gold Collar Gissa coming out of the deck, and it was a lot of fun trying to figure out, okay, I have all these older cards. These cards can actually go in this deck, because I liked playing zombies even before that. So I was like, okay, let's build around Gissa, and I made a Gissa deck where that was like my first actual commander deck, and it did okay. Wasn't great because there's people with more powerful stuff, and you know, I like the environment at Cataclysm. They do the pods. Everybody's guaranteed a pack out of the pod for coming if you're the first one to get eliminated, and if you win the pod, you end up with 4 packs. Nobody is really ahead in the game, though. The players there don't. It's not competitive EDH. They don't buy their decks. They don't spend $2,000 and just win outright every time they play. So that's something that I really enjoy. And most of the paper Magic discussion that we'll have on this channel will mostly come from the standard point of view, along with a little bit of a commander point of view, along with a little bit of standard and some limited. I do enjoy limited from time to time. Digitally, of course, Magic Arena. You're gonna have the formats that are there: the standard format, historic format, historic brawl, since that's the closest thing I'm going to see to commander in that program for right now. Very little alchemy. I'm not happy with the way they've treated that format. It'd be a whole other discussion to have, but I don't like digital first cards being mixed into the standard cards that they're trying to adjust. So we'll leave it at that for now. Might do some product openings, Magic theory, craft, and decision making ideas, product recommendations for sleeves, cases, that kind of thing. We'll do some spoiler reviews. I was trying to get this set up where I was going to do the new Capenna spoilers, and I originally had this recorded to do so, but then I came down with the flu, so I didn't get that edited in time. So we're going to actually have a little discussion about the newest format for Magic Arena, and that is the Explorer format. This was just announced last week. that they are putting a what I would call a stopgap format into Magic Arena in order to facilitate the porting of Pioneer into the program. They're not able to just dump all the cards into the system because you're talking about sets all the way from the Return to Ravnica block, which was the second Ravnica set, all the way forward to now, with New Capenna releasing in a couple of days as of this recording. The idea behind Explorer basically is it's going to have all of those sets, all the cards from the Return to Ravnica sets forward, no digital first cards, no altered cards like they screw around with in Alchemy and Historic. You know, it's a true to paper 1-to-1 format. And then the idea is eventually Explorer will get retired and Historic or Pioneer will become this format once they have all the cards really in the format. It's going to follow the same ban list as Pioneer, and it says they may manage it separately depending on like if something gets overpowered in between hand before they get all the Pioneer stuff in place. And that's going to take time. It's probably going to take them at least a couple of years to get all those cards into the program. Because every time they do a massive card dump into the program, something else breaks. It happened when they did Jumpstart Heroic Horizons. God, I can't talk today. Jumpstart Historic Horizons. And it's happened when they do the historic anthologies. There's just various things. But I do like that they are trying to get Pioneer into the game. And for anybody who doesn't know what the ban list for Pioneer is, here's the banned list. It's pretty straightforward stuff. This is a list of the who's who of cards that have broken Modern and Standard in the last few years. You know, you got your Smuggler's Copters, your Teferi Time Raveler, your Underworld Breach, your Uro Titan of Nature's Wrath, Veil of Summer, Nexus of Fate, Loris of the Dream Den. You know, you got your obvious hard hitters that have no business ever been printed, let alone put in the format. And then you have the 5 allied colored fetch lands that the whole point behind Pioneer was to get away from mana bases requiring fetch lands and to kind of make it easier to jump into a legacy format that's bigger than Standard but not quite as high power as Modern. So, you know, if you need reference, they have the list as to what's been banned, and they have reasons behind those bannings listed on their website. So feel free to look those up if you feel like it. So what this entails then is none of the Alchemy booster stuff that's digital only, none of the Jumpstart Historic Horizons cards, none of those digital only cards will see play in this format because they will not be legal. If you want to play those things, you're going to have to play Historic or Historic Brawl or Alchemy itself if you want to see those kind of cards be played. It also says that they're going to be doing them as best of 1 and best of 3 matches, just like any other thing in the format. And they're going to do specialty events like the Standard and the Alchemy events that they've been doing for Constructed. So you can use those as your play path eventually. You're also going to be able to do the new play-in points for the competitive play levels. So that's something that's nice. My only concern is they have already said in this article that they're going to be kicking a lot of this off with another historic anthology. Historic anthologies, if you don't know what they are, is basically a 25,000 gold, or I think it was 4,000 gem purchase that you had to make. You got 4 copies of each card that was in the anthology, and they were basically curated cards from Magic's past that they could jam into the historic format. However, that also put a lot of very high-powered, overpowered, in some cases, cards into the historic format, and it was not something that was needed. So I kind of worry that they're going to make it hard, like, to get the old Pioneer cards without ponying up, basically, for each time they're like, oh, here's a new burst of cards, and you're going to have to pay the 25,000 gold or the 4,000 gems, i.e. cash, to get at the cards. Or you're going to be just burning massive amounts of wild cards. And if anybody who's played anybody who's played Arena long enough can tell you, the economy of this game is terrible. It's hard to get your hands on wild cards without spending cash or being very circumspect on what you want to craft and play. That's how I go about it. I don't make every single deck I want to make because I run out of wild cards before I'd ever get anywhere. So you're gonna have to pick and choose your lane basically for the most part. Now as time goes on and this channel starts to grow, I'm hoping that I can start affording to just get whatever cards I want and show you guys more and more things. In the meanwhile, we're gonna try to post a couple times a week, and hopefully, as the channel starts to grow, we'll be able to expand content and maybe do a few things like some of the other channels do. That's my ultimate goal with all this. So before I let you guys go today, I thought I'd offer up a take of an Explorer deck that I have already built, ready to go as soon as this format launches. Just got to make a couple tweaks to it. This is my Rakdos Sacrifice deck that I modified from a historic version I've been running. I actually just hit Mythic with the historic version of this deck. So, the idea behind it is to sacrifice all kinds of odds and ends to trigger Mayhem Devil. For anybody that doesn't know what Mayhem Devil is, it is a 3/3 devil for 1 black-red that says whenever a player sacrifices a permanent, it deals 1 damage to any target. That accounts your opponents too, so if they start sacrificing treasures and other odds and ends, you can start pinging them or pinging their creatures as well. Oftentimes you're going to be actually using his triggers to start dealing with your opponent's board because you're going to have to start controlling their board a little bit beforehand. And a lot of times you'll get a concession on somebody if you just keep blasting their creatures out of the way with the sacrifice triggers. Then the primary engine for this deck is the old Cat Oven combo of Cauldron Familiar and Witch's Oven. If anybody doesn't know what that does, it's a 1/1 cat for black for the Cauldron Familiar, and when it enters the battlefield, each opponent loses 1 life, you gain 1 life, and if you sacrifice a food, return it to the battlefield. So you can get a trigger as you chuck it into the oven, which is an artifact for 1 colorless that says tap it, sack a creature, in this case, the cat. Create a food token, and if the sacrifice creature's toughness was 4 or greater, create 2 food tokens. Well, that part's not going to matter because nothing in this deck is 4 or greater. So, what you're going to do is chuck the cat in the oven, create a food token, sack the food token, bring the cat back. So you're getting 2 triggers per cat you've thrown in the oven. You also have in the deck what I call Cat Light, which is Voldaren Epicure, a 1/1 vampire for a red that says when it enters the battlefield, it deals 1 damage to each opponent. Create a blood token. Now, the blood tokens are self-sacrificing. As long as you have a card in hand, you can pay the costs, sack the blood token, you'll get a sack trigger. But the big deal with this is actually to keep those around and chuck them into the Oni Cult Anvil. Oni Cult Anvil is an artifact for a red and a black that says whenever 1 or more artifacts you control leave the battlefield on your turn, create a 1/1 construct token. It only triggers once each turn, and if you tap and sacrifice an artifact, it deals 1 damage to each opponent, you gain 1 life. The idea is you play Voldaren Epicure on turn 1, get a blood token. Turn 2, drop Oni Cult Anvil, sack the blood token on your turn. They take a damage, you go to 1/1 construct, and then you swing with the Epicure as long as they didn't play anything on turn 1, or 2, depending on who went first. Keeping in with the artifact in Blood Vein, we have Blood Tithe Harvester, a 3/2 for black-red vampire. When it enters the battlefield, you get a blood token, and you can tap and sack himself to give target creature -X/-X until end of turn equal to twice the number of blood tokens you control. So if you got a little bit bigger creature, you can use this instead to kind of tear it down as long as you have a couple blood tokens out. But the drawback is it's sorcery speed, so you have no way to interact with something that you might need to tear down at instant speed. That's why I'm running a player set of Infernal Grasps. 1 in a black, instant, destroy target creature, you lose 2 life. You can use whatever black removal spell you want as long as it's not cast down. You need to have something that can kill Winota, Joiner of Forces as soon as he hits the board, because that card is legal in Explorer, unlike Historic where it was banned. So right now that's looking to be the best deck in the format, and you need to have at least 1 set of some answer to get it out of the way, because if you allow them to swing with 2 or 3 creatures when she hits the board, you're dead. You're not going to recover. You could use Red Cap Melee. Deals 4 damage to any target. If the creature wasn't red, you have to sacrifice a land, which might go in with the theme of the deck, but this deck is a little land light the way I've built it, so you may not want to go that route. We also have 4 Voldaran Bloodcasters, 1 in a black Vampire Wizard, 2/1 flyer. Whenever it or another creature dies, create a blood token, and when you create a blood token, if you have 5 or more on the board, it transforms into Bloodbat Summoner. A 3/3 Vampire Wizard that flies that says at the beginning of combat, you can turn a blood token you control into a 2/2 flying haste black bat until the end of, and then you keep those bats. It's not until end of turn. Slip of the tongue there. And that comes up more often than you would think, because then you can swing in. If you can block with them, there's all kinds of variations of things you can do with the bats. You can still sack them for their ability to draw a card. So it comes up more often than not. It's actually a pretty good setup. And the last card in the deck is, well, last 2 cards, I should say. We have Bastion of Remembrance. For 2 in a black enchantment, when it enters the battlefield, you get a 1/1 soldier token, and whenever a creature you control dies, each opponent loses a life, you gain a life. This is essentially your Sanguine Brushstroke or Blood Artist replacement card in the deck to ping your opponent with. And then you also have the Meathook Massacre, a couple copies of it. I originally had Loris in this deck in the historic version, and I had 4 copies of Bastion of Remembrance in the deck. And you have to have some kind of board sweep. You just have to have it, even if it's just a couple copies. This thing has won me games off of just wiping my own board and nuking my opponent off the board with the damage trigger off of it. If you don't know what Meathook Massacre does, it's X black legendary enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, each creature gets -X until end of turn. Whenever your creatures die, your opponents lose life. Whenever your opponent's stuff dies, you gain 1 life. So it's very flexible. You can even cast it for 0 if you just want the pinging ability for when you're sacking creatures and things like that. Or you suspect you're about to get board wiped or whatever, you can, just drop it and let them wipe into a bunch of damage. So all in all, this deck is pretty good. I've played a similar variation of this deck in the What Was Written event, which is basically what Explorer is. It's the cards from Return to Ravnica onward that are not altered. They're not errated or any of that stuff, except for Companion, because the Companion cards were errated by default. But the mana base for this deck, very simple. 4 swamps, 3 mountains. I have 1 Takenuma in there, because sometimes you need to get that Mayhem Devil back to keep things rolling. 4 Blightstep Pathways, 4 Blood Crypts, because shock lands are legal in this format. A couple Haunted Ridges. I like the mana fixing off of them, but I do not want too many lands that come into play tapped. And if I put a player set in there, I draw them super early and I end up with tap lands and it just slows you down. And then 3 Fabled Passage. You can go get your mountains and swamps out of the deck, and every time you sack one of them, it triggers Mayhem Devil, so it's just a good include. But this is the deck. I highly recommend it. Like I said, I've played a version in Historic, and it's done really well for me. So, and when in the What Was Written event, I went 3-1 with the deck. So give it a whirl, see what you think. You can probably also create it into a best of 3 deck with counters for various odds and end decks that once you know what the metagame is going to shake out to be. Right now, I'm thinking you're going to see either a Rakdos or a Jund Sacrifice deck of some sort with all the incoming treasure mechanics in New Capenna. You're also going to see Winota Joiner Forces decks. You're going to see control decks of varying stripes. I saw an Elemental deck online the other day. It looked kind of interesting. And we're going to mess around with those things when the time comes. So hopefully you've enjoyed what I've done here today, and you'll like, comment, and subscribe on the channel, and please share your comments below. I'm looking to improve as I go. I'm actually just learning how to edit video and put all this together, so hopefully things will improve as time moves on. Thank you for your time, and have a great day.